Hi everyone, it's Natalie. I wanted to come on and make just a follow-up video to some things that I've been thinking about and contemplating pretty seriously since I made the made the VR about Benebell. When these things come up, I have a tendency to spend a lot of time in thought and in contemplation about them. I tend to find them kind of disturbing enough that they shake me back out of any kind of complacency that may have developed over recent months. Yeah, I think after the VR I made to Benebell about the deck that she was asked to review, I decided to go back and rewatch some videos from earlier in the year and from like late last year that are regarding diversity and inclusion in tarot decks. And in particular, I was watching Havana from Sparkle Divine Tarot and Queen Osset from Oya's Girl. And it was after watching Queen Osset's video about Llewelyn's Dark Goddess Oracle that a few thoughts started really popping into my head with greater clarity. The publishers at Llewelyn, they're not asking women of color in the room, who we know who are in the room already, to contribute because they are inherently afraid of the real power these women have, which includes direct experience of the particular goddess or of a particular goddess and her actual power. Suffice it to say simply that without knowing anything else about these two women, responsibility for the final result of the deck, its artwork, its marketing, and so forth, all lies with the publisher. Again, while I don't know the demographic breakdown of the people who are working at Llewelyn, I feel like it's probably safe to guess that it is predominantly white, or at least that the culture of that workplace, regardless of the backgrounds of the people who are actually working there, is reflective of what I would call a more like liberal white hierarchical power structure. Liberal whites in particular are a special brand of ignorant. It's really difficult to be corrected about your level of wokeness when the people around you are unaware of the ways in which they're still participating in a culture and power structure that they believe that they're no longer a part of somehow, even though the truth is that they are. An identity has been created of who they are as an individual, and it's as individual as it is collective, and it's about being really awake to inclusiveness and diversity. And as white people, we're really adept at doing that. So throwing around a word like diversity becomes a part of that white person's woke identity as a liberal pushing back against this new alt-right. And don't get me wrong, we need that. Right? We do need to speak up against that. It's not okay, and it's not something that we want to endorse on any level. You know, the alt-right's fairly recent re-empowerment within popular culture is a very frightening development in the world. We also need to be aware of what it is that we're feeding and of what we're giving energy to. Are we giving it to empowerment and inclusivity of marginalized communities in a direct way? Or are we unintentionally feeding an identity based around someone who does? That's a difficult question to ask. But that is the question that we need to ask if our true intention is really about equality, shared power, and a truly inclusive society. What we're not good at understanding for ourselves, which is part of our conditioning, culture, and the circumstances in which we were raised, is where our blind spots are. Because if something isn't affecting us directly, we find it really difficult to actually see it. it's not pleasant to really put yourself in someone else's shoes who has had a harder life than you do and truly imagine being there. You really have to be almost thrown or catapulted into those circumstances for long enough or regularly enough to have it kind of break you down. And it's hard to imagine being in that place, because if you did, you'd find the dissonance of your life almost too much to bear. But that is also the path of true compassion. Holding space for that dissonance and its resulting discomfort is the path. And I'm not saying that white people are inherently bad, or that we have a conditioning that's so deep that we can't free ourselves from it. I'm talking about, doing our own work to free ourselves up to a point at which, on a day-to-day basis, when we come into direct contact with the ways in which we still have work to do on ourselves and our own personal contribution, to the culture, we can meet that from a place of tenderness and acceptance and humility towards ourselves and towards the source of that next moment of awakening. Which means not blaming the person or excusing the reason why you made a mistake. It means not relying and falling back on pride, blame, judgment, all of those things. Getting to that point requires a lot of willingness to be with discomfort and then to take personal responsibility when you are faced with great discomfort. And it means being willing not to be right and to be corrected, which will, yes, have the impact of making you feel like a little child for a while. The key to real lasting change, however, is to pick up that little child who made the mistake and tell her that it's okay. You knew she wanted to do her best, and she tried so hard. Be gentle, is what I'm saying, when you make those mistakes. Be gentle and loving with that childlike part of yourself that's feeling embarrassed when you get it wrong, and recognize that she would have done better if only she'd known. It's okay. We all make mistakes. It's really crucial, though, that when those moments come up, even when you're trying your best, that you stay with the discomfort long enough to be gentle and tender towards it. It's the only way that you can stay tender, that you will stay humble, and you can stop that flood of blame and judgment, and the one that I've had the hardest time with myself, which is the needing to be right. Because those will come in and they will take over all of the other good work that you're doing. And I offer that because those are truths that I've had to come to terms with and discover. And those are just the fruit of what I've learned. If in those moments when I recognize, wow, I was really wrong, I really screwed that up, I feel so stupid, I feel so exposed, or my favorite, I should have known better, it's okay, you didn't. You didn't know better. But you won't be able to continue to do better if you can't take that little moment where you're feeling vulnerable and where you're hurting and feeling really exposed because it didn't work, and work with it very gently, very, very compassionately. Be your own mother in that moment. Pick up that little child, that little girl, that little boy, and you just love on them. You be the mother to that child at that moment that you wish that you'd had when you were a child, but probably didn't always get, right? So back to the subject of publishers and goddess decks, and this is going to go off a little direction and come right back, so bear with me. I do think it's becoming clear based on my thesis so far that white people don't want to have experiences that are difficult or frightening, right? At least not in a way that's going to interfere with the comfort level, with the belief system, identity, or worldview, and therefore shake it up, shift it, change it drastically enough that it's hard to recognize where they're standing anymore. And I think that that's really because the world reflects back to us just how wonderful we really are, right? And that is, I mean, I think it goes without saying, that's just a really, really comfortable belief to hold. And it is it's a comfortable mirror to look into. It tells you that you're beautiful, that you're strong, that you deserve the best of everything, and so on and so forth. It has its own double-edged sword, right? And that is the shadow that's coming up here. And that shadow is then related to, but what if I don't live up to that mirror that's being held out to me, right? And that's where I feel the white fragility stems from. The standard is so high, it's so perfect, it's so whatever, and you're so close to being almost godlike that if you can't quite get there, in a very black and white dualistic mindset that we all have to some degree or other, it must mean you're bad. That perspective and that need, not to be too challenged by deities, goddesses, etc., that are, in reality, in the cultures of their origin, are pretty frightening. It's going to be challenged if you're going to work with a really powerful goddess like Kali or Oya in an authentic experiential way. Queen Osset mentions that when these goddesses, especially, she was speaking specifically to Oya, that when they're involved in your life and in your practice, it changes very drastically. They will remove whatever is not working and just take it away. And in there she mentions an experience where she lost a job after calling on Oya for help and guidance. And I'm not laughing because it's not because there's anything to laugh at. It's that I have a parallel experience that is pretty recent where something like that happened. So like last fall, after I started working with Dakinis, whose energies I mentioned before is similar to Kali, and I'm gonna intuit based on what Queen Osset said, that Oya is similar in this respect. Dakinis are wrathful. And they're part of the wrathful pantheon of Tibetan deities. They're also regarded as enlightened and compassionate, and compassion and enlightenment are not always about light and love, and they're not always nurturing and gentle. And if there's one thing I've learned about myself and about white culture, it's that it's terrified of anger, and it associates anger only with violence and destruction. And this is why we work so hard at not feeling, much less owning, our anger. But Dakinis and I'm guessing a deity like Oya, don't fear anger. They're pragmatic in their compassion. Dakinis in particular, they carry a flaying knife, which is called a trigog, and which I used to, up until yesterday, wear around my neck. If this were a real flaying knife, it was used to flay the flesh from corpses. But in a Dakini's practice, this is the hook, and they are hooking you with their compassion and then cutting off anything that blocks it. And in the case of the job that I had, it's my belief that they were done. They were just flat done, with energy being stolen from actually doing the work itself, because of the inter-office and inter-organizational dynamics. And so once it had enough training in that environment and had my death doula certification underway, they just cut the ties that held me to that job, and there it went. It was just done. So I can relate. Right? In white culture, let's be more specific. We're talking about like wrathful deities and anger and so on. We're terrified of demons, right? Which is now so common on paranormal TV shows and ghost hunts that I think they're probably now responsible from everything to like your teenager's bad mood, and a shadow that moves across the wall, to UFOs and Bigfoot. Everything is demons all the time. But we love angels. And we've turned them from fierce, terrifying entities that made biblical figures duck and cover themselves for fear of being annihilated by the power of God, right? And we've turned them into this embodiment of, these perfect, sweet, divine, loving beings that only ever react, with kindness, with a soft presence, with affirmation of whatever it is that we're seeking, and who will just rescue you perfectly in every way the minute that you call and ask for help. So in other words, we've turned them into our codependent enablers. And we've then invented them in a way that they're there to come and slay the demons or remove demons so that we don't have to confront them. We could also look at that and say that we then hold them up as the ideal of what we are supposed to be if we're a good person, right? So if you're a really good person and you do everything right, and I'm only talking specifically here about white people, right? Just white people, just us. You are basically someone who doesn't ever raise their voice, who is who looks like the divine mirror that I held up, which is now also holding an angel in it, right? I just think we can't ignore the impact that all of these things have on the way that white people define themselves and see themselves, because it's there. It's right there in front of us. We're just not practiced at looking at it. Right? This is one example of the many ways in which we freely change the meaning of something at will in order to protect our own egos, our own perspectives. And we do this a lot, very, very specifically, where it relates to something spiritual. Let's not go into a thing where we decide we're going to blame all of this on Doreen Virtue. Before we do that, we need to realistically look a lot further back in history to see how Doreen Virtue was originally influenced, right, in the first place. Because the truth is that we were too, which is why the foundation for her angel decks was already laid in the first place. The intention is just to look at what is the mirror, what is it that we're seeing, how are we seeing ourselves, and why is it as white people that we need to take anything that doesn't conform to that and then change it and shift it so that it does, right?